Hello, hidden gems. I don't think John knew I went live. I kind of threw that on him right there.
Yeah, there was a moment of shock, but we're okay.
Usually I give him a little warning. Okay, I'm about to press live. I'm about to do it. I'm about to do it.
Yeah.
And I didn't that time because we were a little bit late. But hello. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today after this second day of defense in the Chad Daybell trial. I am going every day to court. I was in court today, and Dr. John MATTHIAS is my co-host, my partner in crime, and my husband. And that's what I mean by partner in crime. The good kind of crime, the true crime, podcasters, the expert. He is a forensic and clinical psychologist, my husband, Dr. John MATTHIAS. And so he has been watching every day from home. And I was watching in court, and we text each other and we call during break, and here we are. And this is real time too. John and I do not discuss all of our thoughts before we jump on live with each of you. So this is, I do my lunch live. Those are my initial thoughts. And John is now it's his turn to give his initial thoughts, usually quite different than mine. So I'm gonna give it to you today, John.
Yeah. So let's start with what I thought was the highlight of the day. And well, first of all, let me just offer my thoughts in general. I think the defense's case is really lackluster. And defenses take a risk because when they put witnesses on, a lot of times what a defense team will do is they'll ignore context, meaning they'll take evidence out of context and they'll present it as if it's meaningful in and of itself. And then the prosecution's job is to come back and contextualize that information. Mm-hmm. And when you contextualize it, oftentimes you make the defense look bad. And I think you're getting a version of that here. There's a risk that defenses can blow up. The juries will be frustrated or miffed by a defense case when it's really weak. So, I'm not you're in there looking at the jury. I don't know how they're responding, but so far the defense, I think, has been pretty weak. So, whether that works against them, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could argue that the defense's job, Pryor's job, essentially is just to sow any doubt, to create just a little bit of doubt so that he can get his client acquitted or at least a hung jury. So I suppose that's what he's up to, obviously. And he's had moments where I think he's done pretty well with that. But let's talk about a moment that didn't go so well.
Let's talk.
Here's my highlight of the day. It was the Idaho AG person. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name. But he was referring to an...
Oh, no, not before Rich Smith. Yeah.
He was referring to the long interview he did with Melanie Gibb. And, I didn't know where he was going. I didn't know where Pryor was going until he got to his point, which was that there was a moment during the interview, which apparently was over 3 hours. He had this really lengthy interview, and then the recording switched off, apparently. And at that moment, Melanie Gibb was intent upon telling the officer her real thoughts, which was that she could determine who was light and dark, and she was going to tell him what he was. And so this moment for Pryor was trying to make the point that Melanie Gibb had this capacity and this power to designate light and dark. And therefore, I think what he was trying to do was he was trying to create some doubt about whether Chad was leading this group.
Right.
And he was suggesting that Melanie Gibb may very well have been leading the group and that she had this power to designate people numerically and to call them light and dark.
Right.
Right. And so that was a fascinating moment. You know, there's a big risk in doing that, of course. And during the thing that got my attention about that moment was that the tape recorder goes off. Right. So this is no longer on the record. This is between two people, no tape recorder. Like in that moment, I thought Melanie Gibb is now taking a page out of Chad Daybell's playbook. That this is now becoming right, because Chad would use the system of light and dark to flirt with different people, to flirt with women. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is Melanie Gibb, who's now about to have this flirtatious exchange with this officer, because it's not on the record. So the way I interpret it was essentially, if you're gonna have to forgive my impression of Melanie Gibb, but basically it was something like telling him, yeah, you know, you're totally light. You know, you got a great aura. And by the way, are you single?
Because I'm with David Warwick, but it's long distance, so probably not for long.
No, all right. Well, I mean, she's divorced from David. Now you know why she's divorced, right?
Well, no, like, she just filed. She's with David Warwick.
But my point is that like this would
Chad was married too.
Yeah, this would be an indication of why Melanie Gibb would eventually get divorced. I mean, well, I'm not saying for sure. I know she's flirting, but I think it's really interesting that it's off the record, and she's kind of telling this guy, look, you're really light. You've got this great aura. You're such a great person. There's definitely an element of flirtation going on there.
Yeah.
And so,
validating him with, you know, just his light aura. You'd be so light. You're off the charts light. I don't even know what to do with your lightness. Look at that aura. Your Lighty McLight face is just glowing. Yeah.
Right. Look at that aura. That's remarkable. Are you single?
Glowing like those malachite wedding bands that they purchased on Amazon.
So, I mean, talk about missing the point for Pryor, because it's interesting too that they did an interview for 3.5 hours and not once does she talk about this with them. And then the recording stops and all of a sudden she's like, oh, look at that aura. Your aura is hot.
Well, and Katie's pointing out, well, he did ask. He's like, so tell me about this light scale. What do you think I am?
Okay, well, so maybe it was a reciprocal flirtation. I don't know. But it's to me, I don't know. It's super telling to me that this is occurring off the record, right? This is occurring after 3.5 hours. And it was also funny to me that the officer felt inclined to call Pryor. He's like, oh my gosh, I got this incredible information on Melanie Gibb. She thinks she's running the cult. She can designate people light and dark. Can you believe it? Like, and Pryor's like, oh, this is amazing. This is huge. You know, this is going to get my client acquitted.
Melanie Gibb's the mastermind.
except for the fact that it was a flirtation. And not only that, when the prosecution came back and cross-examined him, they basically learned that Chad was in charge. Like, he said that Lori was the one who taught Melanie Gibb, and Chad was the one who taught Lori, and therefore this is Chad's beliefs. So it blew up in multiple ways. This was like a landmine,
right?
That the defense stepped on, because not only was there kind of this ridiculous, for me, the ridiculous kind of flirtatious moment, but we also learned the prosecution reinforced the fact that this was Chad's belief system, and it was Chad's belief system that ultimately impacted Melanie Gibb.
Correct.
And so when you learn that also kind of, to me, that also solidifies the flirtation thing, because she's seen Chad in action using his system of light and dark to impress people, and especially women, even her. Chad flirted with her with this very same system.
She was married to Chad in a past life.
Right, exactly. So here we see Melanie Gibb pulling it out, pulling this whole, ideological system out of her back pocket and trying to use it to her advantage. And so I don't know. I thought that was a kind of a crazy moment, a humorous moment, a moment that I'm not sure the jury will pick up on that, but just a moment that to me really backfired on the defense.
Yeah. Right. They're not making Melanie Gibb the mastermind. Melanie Gibb's like, you are so light. don't ask me anything else. I know there's an ongoing joke that that John Pryor's defense is the raccoon and Melanie Gibb colluded. You know, the raccoon, Melanie Gibb, and a few law enforcement officers who staged some things.
I know that raccoon keeps coming up. Came up again today with the neighbor,
with Regan Price,
saying that hearing the gunshot, she doesn't remember when it was at all, but she just assumed that a raccoon was shot. So I guess there must be a lot of raccoons shot in that area. So maybe that's par for the course. But again, as I said yesterday, then if that's the case, it actually bolsters the prosecution's case, because it suggests that if raccoons are so common and everyone's shooting them, then what's Chad going to say in a text? He's not going to say, hey, I just killed Tylee and I'm burying her. He's going to say, I killed a raccoon. Right.
That's the easy story. Chad's not creative. He's like, oh, raccoons get shot. Let's work on raccoons.
Shoot raccoons around here all the time. So, I'm going to pretend that Tylee's a raccoon.
Someone pointed out that the next probably off-record question Melanie Gibb asked was, are you married? Your wife is dark.
Right. That would have been his next. That would have been her next gambit in that little interaction. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Your wife is dark, and I know how to solve that problem.
Jeez.
So let's see what else. Like I said, it was pretty uneventful today. Let's talk a little bit about the pathologist, the expert witness pathologist who came on.
I'm really curious your thoughts, because you are an expert witness for the courts in criminal cases.
Yeah. So the most interesting thing about the pathologist is, well, first of all, let me just say about the pathologist that she didn't really help the defense's case, in the sense that her conclusion, after going through this whole spiel, her conclusion essentially was that the cause of death is indeterminate. So she's not saying that Tammy died of natural causes, which is what the defense is trying to prove. She's just saying it's indeterminate. So I guess if you're trying to introduce a shred of doubt that indeterminate is better than murdered, right? But Pryor is trying to pull on that strand that says, well, this may not have been murder. This may have just been something else. Of course, she couldn't really explain the bruises. And she actually helped the prosecution when she said that when she talked about how much weight would be necessary to kind of crush someone's lungs, essentially to asphyxiate them, and which opened the door for the prosecution to say, oh, so you think there could have been multiple people, meaning Alex Cox and Chad Daybell.
That's what I thought too. That's where my mind went. I'm like, so you're saying it took two people. So you're implicating Chad Daybell. You're saying that Chad had to help.
Right. So you're saying that Alex Cox and Chad Daybell essentially sat on her chest, or whatever they did, put pressure on her chest, however they did it, and collapsed her lungs, leading to her death. Although I guess her lungs were intact. So bleeding, there was blood coming out of her mouth. There was foam coming out of her mouth, which, of course, is completely natural. So the pathologist, the other thing, so let's talk about expert witness here in general. That one of the things, if I'm going to testify, I want everything. I want to know the context. I want to know, I don't just want what the defense is going to give me. So if I'm working for a defense attorney, I'll say, have you sent me everything? Have you given me everything have you given me all the discovery you have? That's my question always, because I don't want to be surprised and I want to know the context in which the evidence occurs. So like a perfect example if people are asking, what does that mean? A perfect example of context would be, let's say that someone's stabbed in the heart. So technically you can say, if someone's stabbed in the heart, you can say, okay, the person died from a structural anomaly to the heart. Or you can say that they died from heart failure or structural failure with a puncture wound. Right? Technically, I guess from a medical standpoint, you can say that. But if you know that the husband was estranged, the husband was making death threats, the husband was stalking, that you have police reports saying the husband was stalking, if you know that the husband broke into the house the night that the so-called structure anomaly to the heart occurred, right, then you're going to make different conclusions, because the context is technically, medically, I guess a pathologist or a coroner could say heart failure, or they could say the cause of death was, right, that it was a puncture wound to the heart, whatever. So, but if you understand this history of the relationship where the husband's a stalker and making death threats, and all of a sudden the wife or the spouse or the partner dies, is stabbed, presumably by the husband or ex-husband, then you would rule it a homicide.
Right.
And any reasonable pathologist or coroner would come to the conclusion, given the context of the situation I just mentioned, that the death was not a result of a heart failure. The death was a result of someone murdering the person in question.
Right. Manner of death, homicide. Cause of death, asphyxia.
Right. And so Pryor was he was doing a version of that with his expert witness. He was trying to show that he was trying to create doubt, but he was ignoring context. And when the prosecution referenced, I don't know how many reports, like 40 reports or 50 reports, pieces of discovery that the coroner used to make the determination of homicide, that the expert witness didn't know about, didn't have access to, didn't read, didn't reference, didn't use in research. I mean, I actually felt bad for her. I mean, I think she certainly understands that she needs to have all the discovery, but I guess she decided not to have the discovery. I don't know why she didn't have all the discovery. It may have been as simple as Pryor just kind of feeding her information that he thought was useful to his conclusion.
I don't know. It was a medical examiner's report. You would think that he would give him all the discovery in the medical examiner's report and explain that too. That beyond what John Pryor said at the end of this question about confirmation bias, which we'll get to, let's remove that last word, murder, which everyone's asking about as Freudian slip. Just take that what he stated without murder at the end. Just the idea that it's confirmation bias to look at all the discovery or the interviews. That's preposterous. That's the exact opposite. If you don't look at all, like the pathologist has confirmation bias because she's not looking at all of the evidence and she's choosing to look at only certain aspects of the evidence. And the other things, will you also explain what collateral evidence or discovery is? Because some people are like, well, you wouldn't include these interviews in, assessing this, the manner of death, which is homicide, but you would, because those things matter. It is evidence when assessing manner of death, which is homicide.
Right. What the experts should be doing in this case is weighing in on that determination, that opinion of homicide. And the only way you can do that is if you have access to all the information. So collateral means collateral information would be information from outside sources. So it would be, so what I do is a little bit different. So for example, let's say that I want to learn, let's say I'm doing an evaluation of someone who committed murder. My goal let's say that it's an insanity case. So I want to make some determination of whether that person was responsible at the time of the crime. I want to assess their mental state. I need to know their history in depth. I need to know, is there a history of mental health issues? Is there a history of violence? Is there a history of relationship problems? And so collateral information in that case would be police reports, previous police reports, previous arrest reports. It would be interviews with spouses, interviews with people that know the person, friends, neighbors, children. So in other words,
Exactly.
collateral information is information that outside information that can provide some perspective on the situation I'm trying to evaluate.
In collateral information, when it comes to manner of death, I disagree with this comment here. I pulled it up. That's why I asked you, John, to bring this up and discuss this, because I keep seeing comments like this, and this is not correct. You have to use collateral evidence when you're assessing a manner of death, not the cause. The cause is asphyxia. That's science. The manner of death, you use other evidence. Manner and cause are two different things. Cause, science. Asphyxia. Manner, collateral matters.
Right, because I mean, yeah, it's right, exactly. That if you want, if it's asphyxiation, and again, to get back to my example, if somebody punctures the heart, you can say that might be technically that might be the cause of death, but it's not. It doesn't help you understand. It doesn't help you make a determination of why.
Right. The manner is why. And that
Exactly.
And the manner is doing it yourself. That's the only word I can use. It's homicide. It's those are the type of things. There are 5 that they gave that are possible manners, and they have to do with that evidence. The why. The cause is science. The why, all of those collateral interviews matter. They're evidence.
Right. She can't weigh in on, I mean, his point was that he's trying to question the idea of homicide. And homicide is an interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's where you have to get collateral information. If you're going to make some type of interpretation, which is what I do, that with psychology, it's much more complicated. We can't pull out a ruptured spleen and say that this is the cause. So we have to get different types of information from as many sources as possible, including testing.
So I have it. So Jennifer B says that collateral information is still data and contributes to the scientific conclusion. Here are the 5, and thank you for your wording. Not so daring, devil. Homicide, self, accidental, natural, and undetermined. Those are the 5 manners. And so I agree with Jennifer, who just said it's still scientific data. The collateral data is scientific, or the collateral data is evidence that leads to the scientific conclusion. So
there's a field called hermeneutics, which is all about interpretation. Hermeneutics is essentially the art and science of interpretation. And the basic premise behind hermeneutics is that we have to, even if it's scientific data, it still has to be interpreted. There's still a context around which that information occurs. When you get into the 5 that were just listed, you're still making an interpretive judgment based on the information. But again,
correct.
even if her conclusion is that it's indeterminate, right? Which doesn't really help the defense. I mean, it could sow some seeds of doubt, but it's not definitive. Obviously, indeterminate means it could be murder. Could be homicide.
Correct. Yeah. And somebody's saying the determination. Anyway. Yeah, exactly. We'll leave it at that. We'll move on because I know we have so much to cover.
So I think the important point, though, is that, that when a defense team brings out experts or witnesses and they try to pull information out of context, it's a risk because it can really backfire. And, I think you're seeing some of that with this defense case. And you see when the prosecution is trying to challenge the context and present it in a different light, Pryor's objecting every time because he doesn't want the prosecution to reestablish the larger context in which these murders are occurring, in which this case is occurring.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
So other than that, I mean, I thought it was pretty uneventful today. Those were kind of my main.
Well, what about the Freudian slip? What about Joe? Hold on. Nothing?
I mean, yeah, I thought it was interesting. Joe wasn't the Freudian slip.
No, it was John Pryor discussing with your expert witness. Here we are. Here it is.
Is that an example of confirmation?
Here is a video proof. Here we go.
Is that an example of confirmation bias when you take into account all of these other reports, documents, statements of people who were not present at the murder? Is that an example of confirmation bias when you take into account all of these other reports, documents, statements of people who were not present at the murder?
I mean, it was a pretty great moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I kind of gave him a pass. I hear what you're saying. I sure you could see it as it's certainly a mistake. It is definitely potentially a slip. But I kind of interpreted him to say at her death.
But I mean, he's literally arguing that it's natural. He's like saying this is a natural death, and then he calls it a murder.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, it's not a great moment for him for sure.
People are asking if anyone in the gallery gasped. Yes, people gasped, and Ingrid's face was like, "Yeah, it was a moment."
Yeah, I mean, I don't, but again, is the jury going to hear that? Are they going to pick up on that? I don't know. Yeah, it certainly wasn't his finest moment.
Right. To say the least. At time of death is what he should have said. At time of death.
Yeah.
I mean, so much for a natural death. John Pryor just admitted to the pathologist it's a murder. I mean, if it was JJ and Tylee, it wouldn't matter, but the entire defense revolves around Tammy dying naturally. Everything he's called is like, it was natural, it was natural, it was natural. Oh, but no, I'm going to redirect with this witness, this pathologist, and say, it's not, it's not, isn't this confirmation bias in discussing Tammy's murder? I'm like, well,
yeah.
Then he turned, see what I did there, guys? No, just kidding. He didn't. He did not turn to the gallery and say that. It was a big whoopsie, I thought. I think that some of the jury caught it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's what counts, is whether the jury was paying attention to that moment. Yeah, I mean, does it indicate potentially what he really thinks? Sure. It as you point out, yeah, it's definitely a slip.
Yeah. Robin B brings up one that matters to me too. Joe Murray dissing police. Thoughts on Joe Murray's testimony in general. Robin was referring to a police officer in Boise area, where we had court off a couple of weeks ago. But just the fact that well, let me ask you about Joe Murray's. Let me not feed you what I think. Let me ask you about Joe Murray's testimony. Or it was actually his cross. We started with his cross today with Wixom.
I didn't think he was. I thought he was kind of a weak witness for the defense.
Clearly.
I mean, he actually, again, that's a situation where context matters. We talked about one of the most interesting things about what he said in cross was he basically said that, that Pryor wants to hammer home this idea that with the paintball gun and even with the murders, that why didn't anybody see people? Why didn't anyone see who had the so-called paintball gun, right? And Joe Murray basically answered that. He said, well, there's parts of the yard that you can kind of get into where nobody can see you and there's poor visibility, right? Like he basically said, yeah, there's a lot of ways to get away with not being seen around the Daybell property. And so he kind of undermined one of the points Pryor's trying to make, which is that nobody saw any of these people do anything.
Right. Well, I took what you said about Emma yesterday. Is it my turn to share my thoughts?
Sure.
Because I thought Joe's cross was jaw-dropping. I took what you said about Emma yesterday and felt similarly with Joe. He saying that he was so indifferent to children being buried in the yard where he lives. He saw no reason for police officers to drive by slowly being a crime scene with children. He said there's no reason. And they kept pushing him. You see no reason for police officers to drive slowly past a crime scene where 2 children were found. No reason. And then he goes on to say, I would, his disdain for law enforcement, I would never, it's a terrible profession. I would never, ever be on law enforcement. The indifference is not just a disrespect to law enforcement. It was an indifference to the victims, in my opinion, to empathy, to seeing, to reality, to understanding what exactly has happened. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I saw that I felt like he was being more like Emma yesterday I think in those moments he was being a little oppositional. And that's how Emma was during cross. I think he was being defiant and oppositional and I think we understood better why he was being that way because he said during cross that he talked to Emma all the time. The prosecution basically, we learned that they have been strategizing about what to say and they've been talking about this case all the time together. So since things initially broke. So clearly that's why they're on the same page. And I think that's why they're both kind of defiant because they have their narrative of how this occurred and they're going to stick with it.
He's even changed his story, according to Cross, that he referred to the truck as Tammy's truck, which matters when it comes to the paintball gun incident, which is actually a shooting incident. And by shifting from this was my mother-in-law's truck to Chad drove the truck, it shifts who the target is. And they did that. They did shift because some screenshots have come up. I sent you one. I don't know if you had time to see it, where Emma Murray, the day her mother died, did refer to it as her mother's truck. And they alleged that during the grand jury indictment, they referred to it as Tammy's truck. I mean, they are not looking like trustworthy witnesses possibly lying and changing their story.
Right. And that's kind of consistent with what I said yesterday, which is when your star witnesses are all family members who basically carry the defendant's water, right, or have the same belief system or buy everything he's saying, then their credibility is in question.
Correct.
And I think that's going to be pretty apparent to the jury.
Right. Right. I think so too. I think between Joe and Emma, they have not left a good impression on the jury. I'll say that much.
Yeah, Garth
actually-
was a little more authentic, I think. Garth was more likable. He wasn't as defiant.
Although I don't know if you know this, so didn't mute in time. I apologize, everyone. I'm sorry. Well, I did. I mentioned this to you yesterday, but this idea of Tammy Daybell, Garth saying that Tammy was eating a quarter pounder with cheese is concerning because a couple weeks ago during Cross, Lindsay Blake asked the medical examiner if any McDonald's or a Big Mac was found in Tammy's stomach at the time of autopsy. And they said no. What was found were potatoes and peanuts. So it puts into question also this idea that perhaps the story of McDonald's isn't necessarily true either. And I don't know if the jury will catch that because they haven't brought up really the McDonald's in defense a lot. But it was certainly brought up a couple of weeks ago. And I do think Lindsay Blake tried to use the word Big Mac to try to get that in people's minds. And then Garth testified to this McDonald's run. But according to the autopsy, she didn't eat McDonald's. So this idea that she ate McDonald's and threw up is also sketchy.
Right. It throws into question his credibility. Although I think Pryor was trying to draw a connection between McDonald's and Tammy's health, and to imply that because he said it after Garth mentioned that, he said that's a healthy diet. I forget exactly what he said, but he said something to the effect of, he made a comment about her. He said that's a healthy meal. Right. So he's implying that if she's not eating healthy and she's tired all the time, he's trying to get to the natural causes until today when he said murder, I guess. But yeah.
Right. He's trying to get to these natural causes of seizures and, hey, Cheryl, and murders. And Carrie Hansen says, I'm shocked at how juvenile these people appear. They sound childish, yet they seem to think they're clever fifth graders. Clueless that their tactics are obvious, exaggerating, adding extra info, code, and I would say shifting stories. Any insight, John?
Yeah, I agree. There's the whole thing is very infantile. The whole thing is very childish. The way they talk, the way they think, the way they act. Yeah, it's peculiar. Right. I mean, it's like watching a bunch of children engaged in some type of like fantasy play or something. Yeah, it's crazy. I agree. These people, a lot of these people are so regressed, childlike.
I agree. We've been talking. We've been talking a lot off camera with people in court about the voice cadence, and you mentioned a flat affect. But I just want you to know a lot of people have been asking a little bit about the way Emma sounds in particular. So yeah, I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that as far as a flat affect goes. Or maybe that's just where you want to land
Yeah, I mentioned yesterday that she came off as kind of monotone. She didn't really show any affect until cross-examination occurred, and then you could tell she was being oppositional. She was being terse. She was being short with the prosecution. So, you know, there was a little bit of anger, but outside of that, I mean, yeah, she came across as pretty flat, but that's no, when I say flat, I mean without emotion, but that's no surprise, I think, because look at the family she grew up in. You know, her dad is the same way. And Tammy suffered, as far as we know, Tammy was on Prozac. That suggests Tammy suffered from depression. So Tammy probably struggled with her emotions too. So, I mean, you're essentially looking at a family culture that struggles with emotions, to feel them, express them, have them, deal with them, right? And so it wouldn't be surprising that the children, and Emma in particular, would be similar to their father.
Justice Collector is asking, do you believe the dislike of the police added to the idea of them being ingrained into the cult? Or that is interesting, like the idea that they'd be afraid of outsiders or authority. Does that sort of imply a cult?
I think it goes with the terrain. The whole their beliefs, their religious beliefs, probably their political beliefs, right? There's kind of this anti outsider perspective in general. So it's kind of part of that. Potentially, you know, you see that in certain areas of the country that, you know, that are probably a little more insulated. And so so that would probably be pretty typical, kind of this anti-outsider, anti-government type attitude.
We'll leave it at that. Yeah, Lynn is saying the same thing. Joseph saying being a cop is the last thing he'd ever do. Completely discredited all he said.
Right. I mean, yeah, right. It is very oppositional. But I also heard him saying in a way, like, leave us alone. You know,
Right.
just let it go. Leave us alone. You don't need to find out where the kids are. Just leave us, you know, let us go on with our lives. I mean, you know, right there, as you point out, there's a real lack of empathy. Like, do they really want the kids to be found? Do they really care?
Yeah, they're living in the house. I don't know if they do. Also, if you wanted to go away, go live somewhere else. They don't need to live there at a crime scene. I don't know. Let's see. People are asking what the jury's reactions at the end of today. They were tired. They're tired, and Judge Boyce apologized to them. He said, I'm sorry, jurors, that we're not having full days here with witnesses. That yesterday we got out early and today we got out early, both for the same reason. Why? Because witnesses weren't ready to go. And Judge Boyce apologized to the jury because we've got Memorial Day coming up.
Right.
They could have this thing wrapped up, and they don't. And so I think that Judge Boyce was probably talking to the jury because of what they look tired. And no one was sleeping. I don't mean by that. They look emotionally tired. Like they're ready for this to be wrapped up. And I think part of these witnesses coming, they're like, why? You know? So that was my thought. But they were listening. They were listening and taking notes. But I think they were very confused by a lot of the defense witnesses.
Yeah, it has been somewhat disjointed. It's I think the most effective defenses are able to develop a theory of the case that's opposed to the prosecution's theory of the case, and they're able to do that effectively. And I don't have any sense of what their theory of the case is, except for law enforcement apparently is corrupt or somehow, I don't know. It's not super clear what they're trying to do. I mean, he's trying to poke holes in in the prosecution's case, obviously, but he's not really developing a sound theory of what's going on here, other than Melanie Gibb being in charge and flirting with the the officer from the AG's office
with the raccoon. And also, there's been a lot of attempting to frame law enforcement as well. Melanie Gibb, the raccoon, the law enforcement, and Lori Vallow have really taken the brunt. Although I will say, I think John Pryor should pick one, to really sort of point the finger at, but he's got Melanie Gibb, the raccoon, law enforcement staging things. He's got Lori Vallow being too sexy. He's got Tammy being, her natural death is her fault because she's too unhealthy and cheats on the Fitbit. I mean, everything and everyone's to blame.
Yeah, cheating on the Fitbit's unforgivable.
But his client, implying she's lazy.
Well, and that speaks to what I'm saying about a theory of the case. And I've talked about this a lot in the past, but juries are swayed by the most coherent story. So whoever tells the best story that's supported by the evidence usually wins. Not always, but most frequently. And so the problem with the defense putting on kind of what I would call scattershot defense is it lacks coherence and it lacks kind of a coherent theory of what's going on. And if you don't, the best defenses will give you a coherent narrative that opposes the prosecution, and then they'll use some evidence to support it. So, but if you're not doing that, if you're just trying to poke holes in the prosecution's case, a lot of times you see what we're seeing here, which is that things get taken out of context. The prosecution comes back and, undermines a lot of the testimony of the defense star witnesses, right? They're not putting this all together into a narrative that really adds up.
Barb states, it appears there's an underlying anger with the entire Daybell clan. They speak in measured, monotone voices, yet there appears to be some hidden rage. Thoughts? Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. So usually in these types of family cultures that are really constrained and insulated, and I think that would be true of the term which sometimes uses a mashed meaning that they're all kind of fused together. The family identities are kind of fused. They're not really independent people in the family that have independent opinions. So a lot of times in those types of families, emotions get really suppressed, but anger is the one emotion that kind of seeps through. And actually, that's exactly what we saw with Emma, and maybe to a lesser degree with Joe Murray. But Emma was definitely, on cross-examination, she was definitely angry.
Yeah. I agree. As was as I keep saying, I know, Freudian slip, as was Joe Murray.
Right. Joe, yeah. I think Joe was a little more composed, but yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know, stubborn. Nope. No reason for any law enforcement to drive past a crime scene. Just go away.
Yeah. Right.
Most likely culprit, the Fitbit wearing raccoon. Yes.
Yeah, the Fitbit. The Fitbit, you're right. That I think the Fitbit should become a bigger part of the defense then.
Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, I know it. I know it. Anything else, babe?
On the Fit, so I used to wear a Fitbit. It broke, but I don't have one now. But
you're like,
I didn't know
so hard it broke.
I didn't know you could do that.
I don't think
I would have done that to fool you when you asked about my steps. I would have been, doing the.
Except that would have been a harder workout than just walking. Think about that. Like that's some serious, that's some Pilates stuff right there, man. No wonder Tammy was buff if that's what she was doing.
Yeah, I learned a new Fitbit technique, but I mean, I haven't owned one for a few years, but
You're like Chuck Norris. You took so many steps it broke. Or the I don't know if
no,
that's a thing.
I think I inadvertently was, since I was always cheering people on, I had to do this all the time. I don't know.
Yeah. Hey, look, I give Tammy credit. If she was in her bed playing Candy Crush with one hand while, doing this with the other, like,
Yeah.
that's some calories, dude. That's some calories and some sheer strength and some determination and some serious, not laziness going on. Like, that's all the power to her, man. That's good
Also,
job.
it's hard for me to believe that she was that wrapped up in this competition. Really, like these people
I
are
know.
like they're fighting over who had the most steps every day. I mean, I guess I don't know. That seemed a little. To me, that didn't seem totally believable. It didn't seem like
I
Tammy would
know.
care that much about that competition.
No, it felt like they were just really enjoying making sure everyone knew that Tammy was lazy. I have okay, here's my question for you. This it's shocking to me. Thank you, Dal. It's shocking to me. I think most of the community, going back to yesterday, because you left early yesterday, so I'm going to get you on a few things, that they would really just kind of throw Tammy under the bus to save their dad, and to find out that Emma's talking to her dad every day, and there seems to be some serious coercive control in the family, and people are just sort of like looking at these children just kind of with, wide eyes, thinking, wow, what's going on? And so my very broad question to you, and perhaps you can make it less broad, is how does this happen in a family? What does this mean about the family system? Or what does it tell you about what's been going on in the Chad and Tammy Daybell family for a while? Does it tell you anything about Chad and how he ran his family, or how this could happen with the children where they just follow his every step and guidance? I don't know. I don't know if you have anything to say to that, but I think people are just really curious now about Chad and how he's and his kids. How did this happen?
Well, as I mentioned, so I think it's a very enmeshed family system, meaning that the members are all fused. But within that structure, you have very traditional roles, I think. And so Chad played a very traditional role of the patriarch who had control of the family. He probably dictated the rule. He set the rules. He set the roles. He probably dictated a lot of what was acceptable behavior. So he kind of had the moral high ground in the family. And I think on top of all that, you had what I would call a closed family system, meaning that a very healthy family system every family has boundaries with the outside world. And some families have boundaries that are too open. They share everything. They really don't set any limits in terms of what comes in and out of the family system. Other families are extremely closed, meaning that they guard all information. So, in other words, they have a lot of secrets, and those secrets are never known. They might be known to some of the members, but they're not known to the outside world. Also, they protect information coming into the system. So, if Chad has this really bizarre belief system, really extreme belief system, a closed family is going to make sure that no ideas enter the family system that can challenge that. So you have a very closed family system that's enmeshed, where the members really don't have independent identities, and it's very traditional. It's led by the patriarch. That's Chad. Chad controls all the rules, all the roles, the functioning of this family. And I think that's how that's how you see children like this. That's how you get to this point that the other thing that happens in these types of families is there's no challenges to authority. There's no challenges to beliefs. There's no challenge. If you challenge a family So if one of the children let's say a child, is in school and learns something different and they want to challenge the authority of the system, in this case, Chad, oftentimes there'll be threats, either implicit or explicit threats about if you challenge me, you're going to be disowned by this family. If you challenge me, I won't accept you, right? There's, in many ways, there's this underlying threat of survival, in the sense that there's this perception that if you violate or challenge the authority of the family, you're going to get thrown out of that family. You're going to be on your own. And so I think that's how you get here. You in these types of families, you have a lot of denial, and again, there's no challenges, and so you see like Emma and Garth, they're not going to challenge their dad's authority no matter what. If he says he's innocent, they're going to believe that. They're going to accept that.
Yeah, I believe that, as Troublemaker Baker says, that I believe that Emma was a bit of a spy for Chad. She worked with her mom. She exercised with her mom. She clogged with her mom, Zumba with her mom, church activities with her mom. Did Tammy ever get to be alone? She told the jury when her mother went to bed, even though she's not there at the house. Thank you for explaining that. I think many people appreciate you for sharing that. A couple things Holly asked, do you think that Emma has hostility toward Tammy because Chad would triangulate the women in his life, pitting them against each other?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think she's conflicted about it. I don't know about hostility. I mean, she's close to her mother too. So, but I think
Allegedly.
allegedly. I think she could be put in the middle of a lot of stuff between them. She might be a bit of a peacemaker. I'm not sure. I think I don't know enough about the family dynamics or specifics to really know if there was hostility, but there could be.
It seemed like hostility on the stand. I do think there could be triangulation with women in his life. He manipulated Julie Rowe. He manipulated Tammy. He manipulated Lori. It's an interesting possibility, I think.
I think you could have a dynamic where, since Chad in many ways was not, he was quite distant from Tammy, especially towards the end, probably the last 5 or 10 years. I think you could have a dynamic where Emma was functioning more in a spousal role than Tammy. And so in that sense, there would have been, yes, if there was hostility, it would have been a competitive hostility.
That's what I think.
That Emma would have seen her role as more of a spouse. And so she would have some potentially hostility towards Tammy for maybe undermining Chad to some degree, or by not being an ideal spouse, or by not being as close to Chad. There could be a lot of reasons.
Correct. Someone says this happens in a family where a man rules over the rest of the family and holds power over them. He is the one who has committed adultery and murder and has brought shame to his family. I will say the irony is pretty wild. Like, they now admit that he had the affair. He is the one, that has, let's call it sin, because they're a religious family. He is the one that is not upholding his values. Yet it does seem like everything is Tammy's fault still. You did just sort of answer that. Well, you did answer this, but anything you want to go further? How does this type of family form? Anything you want to take further, or do you feel like that's?
It's probably an intergenerational issue, that a lot of these families just perpetuate themselves over time until there's some type of awareness or recognition that the family's not healthy. And so maybe a crisis or a trauma or something. Oftentimes it takes an outside event to force change in these types of families. So a lot of times I think it's just, it's passed on from generation to generation.
Katie asks, how will these kids react when, if Chad is found guilty? Will they continue to defend him or see the light?
They'll defend him. They'll defend him. And in these types of families, there's in closed systems, there's an inability to deal with reality. So in other words, outside information that challenges the family's culture or perspective is going to be rejected. So even if there's people outside their home with a bullhorn saying your father's guilty, the evidence is overpowering, they don't care. They're not going to listen to it. They're not going to pay attention to it. They're going to reject it.
Do you have concerns about Emma or any of these children passing these beliefs down to their children?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, again, unless you would think that an event like this would shake the system up enough for them to challenge these belief systems and perhaps to change them, but that doesn't seem to have occurred. In fact, it's probably reinforced them.
Yes.
So in that sense, I think you're absolutely going to look at other generations are going to inherit these beliefs.
And then that's a question many people have had for you too. Again, the irony isn't lost on me that when John Pryor is bringing up confirmation bias, we're hearing from all of these Daybell children who clearly refuse to see any evidence, have a bias and the extreme end of confirmation bias. But I keep hearing the question again and again, and people have come up to me at court and wanted me to ask you, how is it that these children can still believe in their dad's innocence, even after hearing of the affair, all of the evidence?
Yeah, again, I think we kind of touched on that with talking about the family culture.
Right.
You have a family culture and a family system that's so enmeshed and so closed and so, shut off from the real world that for them, it makes perfect sense. They're not going to challenge Chad. They're not going to challenge anything. So I think they're just going to accept what he says at face value, no matter what.
Troublemaker Baker, thank you. Go ahead.
And the example I gave yesterday, which was so powerful from the prosecution, was that Emma refused to look at the autopsy results. Law enforcement came to her and said, hey, you want to see the autopsy results? Do you want to talk about them? And essentially she said no. She declined to see the results. She was unwilling to sit down with law enforcement. And again, so that's exactly what we're talking about. This is kind of a family system. They're like an ostrich that they bury their head in the sand and they just hope for the best, that they don't want to know. They don't want to know the facts. They don't want to know the evidence. They don't want to know the reality.
I'm so grateful that I was reminded of this quote from yesterday. This was something that everybody was screaming at me to remind you of before you had to go, and you did have to go yesterday. But this felt like a tell or a slip up to many people. And I want to say that many noticed it. I noticed it in court. Everyone around me noticed it. Many people were in chat noticing it. And it is by Emma Daybell. Emma says, I know that the grief that he felt was real. He may not have had the same romantic relationship with my mother that he had in the past, but I know that he valued her as a person, and seeing her die was very traumatic. And people caught the word seeing, sort of like we caught the word murder today. When Emma said, seeing her die was very traumatic, it was hard for people to look away and not hear that and wonder what she meant. Maybe it was a slip. Maybe you're going to tell us it was, but it was an odd choice of words and it caught everybody's attention. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, she could have been, it's a little confusing because technically she could have been referring to the fact that in theory he was in bed with her, according to their theory of the case. According to Chad's explanation, she died of natural causes. She just fell out of bed. So I guess you could argue, Chad's argument would be, or Emma's argument would be, he was lying next to her. Maybe he heard something. He looked over. He saw her fall off the bed. Right? That would be a version of seeing her die.
Okay.
I mean, he wouldn't have known that she was dead at that point, but when he went over and checked her, that's kind of how I took it. I mean,
Okay.
but yeah, I agree. I think there's a little bit of a slip there too, in the sense that, I mean, the prosecution suggesting that Emma's Googling weather patterns the night before Tylee goes missing, essentially is murdered. You have to wonder what Emma knows.
Right. I agree.
So in that sense, yeah, maybe she knows that her dad saw Tammy being murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could very well. Yeah, it could be like prior today. It could very well be a slip that conveys some real meaning.
Mm-hmm. Well, we learned today that it might take two people. It might have taken two people.
Right, which is completely plausible because we know Alex Cox was right by the house.
And I assume if Emma knew that her mother went to bed at 5, 6, or 7, that she might possibly know that her parents were sleeping in separate bedrooms too, which is what I've speculated on and believe at this moment. Garth referred to it as his mother's bedroom until today's testimony, or yesterday's testimony, excuse me. And then yesterday's testimony, he called it his parents' bedroom. I love Jesus. Yes, I would have a problem. But I said what I said. It would be a problem for me. Yes, if she was my child's teacher. I'll leave it at that.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, very much so. All right, everyone. Thank you. Anything else? I'm scrolling. I've been missing a lot of comments trying to focus on John. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, John, for spoiling us with another live. We just didn't get enough of you yesterday. So thank you for watching along with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
Yes. And we will see everyone in chat tomorrow. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for your likes. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. People say, what can we do to support your channel? People have asked me in court. It's so kind. And I say, tell your friends about us. Subscribe, like. We also have a podcast and that I am updating. And I'm going to be putting this on, and I'm editing and updating, and we have some great episodes there. We have some podcast episodes that are not on YouTube. A couple of them. Just since this trial, and they'll continue. So thank you for those that follow us on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for those that follow us on Patreon. We have a Patreon podcast as well with bonus episodes, over 60 bonus episodes that people haven't heard. So if you want more of Dr. John and less of me, Patreon's the way to go. He is there. Thank you. He even does an episode all on Melanie Gibb. Thank you, John. Thanks for being here. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate your support, and I'll see you tomorrow. John, we'll see y'all soon.
All right.
See you guys.
Goodbye.